The night they came for me, the river was already glowing red with lantern light. I remember the rumble of boots across the bridge, the distant shouts echoing off the cliffs of Harper's Ferry. It was 1859, and the air itself seemed to tremble with judgment. From my window I could see the old armory burning, its iron doors split open like a wound. Men said John Brown was leading slaves to freedom. Others said he was dragging the whole country into madness. I didn't care which was true. All I knew was that my husband was gone, and the war between brothers had found its way to my doorstep. They knocked at my door long after midnight. Not soldiers, not raiders, but neighbors. Men I'd known since childhood, faces lit by the flames they claimed to hate. "Martha," one of them called out, "they say you're hiding a Union spy." I told them no. I told them the only thing I was hiding was grief. But they didn't listen. They searched my house, overturning chairs, rifling through my husband's old war chest, even tearing open the floorboards near the hearth. And when they found nothing, they left me with something worse than accusation. They left me with silence. No one in Harper's Ferry would speak to me again. When dawn came, smoke still curled from the armory ruins. I stepped outside, the hem of my dress damp with dew and ash. That's when I saw it half buried near the garden stones, blackened by fire, a small iron key. I picked it up without thinking. It was warm to the touch, as if the fire itself had shaped it for me. I didn't know what lock it belonged to, but something in my heart told me it wasn't lost by accident. I kept that key in a tin box beside my bed, though I never spoke of it. In Harper's Ferry, superstition was safer than truth. They said the key was cursed, forged by the raiders, meant to open the gates of hell. I smiled when I heard that. If hell had gates, it was the men who'd built them, the same men who called themselves righteous while burning their neighbors' homes. But there was one man I still trusted, then my brother Samuel. He came to me the next day with kind words, gentle as rain. "Sister," he said, "you must clear your name. Let me take care of the papers. I'll handle your husband's pension, your deeds. You need rest, not worry." I believed him. I shouldn't have. A week later, the soldiers left town, and Harper's Ferry went quiet. Too quiet. I waited for my brother to return with my husband's pension papers, but days turned into weeks. Then a letter arrived, not from Samuel, but from the local magistrate. It said the pension had been lawfully transferred to a surviving relative. That relative was Samuel Whitlock, my brother, the man who had sworn to protect me. I rode into town that very afternoon, clutching the letter so tightly my knuckles went white. The magistrate's clerk wouldn't even look me in the eye. "It's done, ma'am," he said softly. "Your brother filed the claim on your behalf. You signed it yourself." He slid a document across the counter, and there it was. My name, written in a hand that looked almost like mine. Almost. I stumbled out of that office, feeling like I'd stepped off the edge of the world. Samuel wasn't just stealing my husband's pension. He was stealing my voice, my identity, my very place in the world. The key in my pocket felt heavier that day, as if it knew before I did that it would one day unlock the truth of everything. They say the town healed after the war, but I know better. Harper's Ferry never healed, it only forgot. The same men who accused me were later called patriots, and the ones they shamed were left to vanish quietly. My house stood at the edge of town, facing the Shenandoah where two rivers met. I watched trains pass, carrying soldiers to new wars, while I stayed rooted in the ashes of the old one. No one came to visit. The church pew where I once sang was empty now. Women crossed the street when they saw me. Children whispered that the widow kept ghosts in her attic. I let them believe it. Perhaps it was better that way. I lived with the ghosts, my husband, my brother, and the key that waited patiently in its tin box, rusting more each year. I never threw it away. I couldn't, because some nights, when the wind came down from the mountains, I swore I could hear a faint rattle inside the walls, as if a lock somewhere was still waiting for that key to turn. 40 years passed before the house spoke again. By then, I was an old woman, thin as parchment, my hands shaking like leaves. My granddaughter, Clara, came to live with me that winter, a kind girl with her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness. One afternoon, she climbed into the attic to fetch an old quilt. Moments later, I heard her call my name. "Grandmother," she said softly, "there's a box up here, and it's locked." My heart stopped. I hadn't been in that attic in decades. I climbed the stairs one slow step at a time, the air thick with dust and memory. And there it was, a wooden chest, scorched on one side, the metal lock still intact. I reached into my apron and felt the weight of the key I had carried for 40 years. My hands trembled as I fitted into the lock. It turned with a sound like a sigh. Inside lay a bundle of letters, tied with black ribbon, the ink still dark after all this time. The first one bore my brother's name. The letters trembled in my hands like living things. The ink had not faded, though 40 years had passed. Each envelope bore a date: October 1859, November 1859, December 1859, the months after John Brown's raid. And each was addressed to my late husband, Captain Elias Whitlock, who had died long before the war began. But the handwriting was my brother's. I felt the room tilt. Clara stood beside me, eyes wide, as I unfolded the first page. The words struck like blows. "Sister Martha is under suspicion," it began. "If she will not confess to harboring the spy, she will lose everything. The deed must be moved before the soldiers arrive. She will not resist what she does not see." My brother's own words proof that the betrayal had not been desperation but design. There were more letters, one to a magistrate, one to a Union officer, even one to a bank clerk in Charlestown, where Samuel had deposited the funds stolen from my husband's pension. It was all there, the signatures, the dates, the lies that had shaped half a century of my life. I looked at Clara, her young face pale with fury. "He did this to you?" she whispered. "Your own brother?" I nodded. My throat felt dry as dust. "He took everything, but he forgot one thing. Paper can rot, but truth does not die." That night, I sat by the hearth, with the letters spread before me. The firelight flickered over my husband's old chair, over the tin box that had kept the key safe all those years. I thought of Samuel, of his smile, his laughter, the boy who once followed me to the riverbank and promised, "I'll always protect you, sister." I thought of how easily love can turn into something unrecognizable when greed takes root. I had lived half my life in silence. Now, with death not far behind me, I realized silence had been my greatest mistake. My story had been buried under their lies. My husband's name had been erased from his own legacy, and every soul in this town walked past my home believing I had betrayed my country, when it was my brother who had betrayed blood. The next morning, I gave Clara my decision. "Tomorrow, we go to town," I said. "These letters will see daylight again." She tried to stop me, said I was too frail, too weak. But I was stronger than I had been in 40 years. Because when truth begins to breathe, it gives life even to old bones. The courthouse hadn't changed since the day they took my name. The same wooden benches, the same creaking door, the same faces older now, lined with guilt and age. As Clara and I walked in, whispers followed us like ghosts. I could hear them saying, "The widow's gone mad again," still chasing old ghosts. The magistrate, Mr. Holcomb, peered at me over his spectacles. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, "I thought this matter was settled 40 years ago." "So did I replied, "until I found the words of the man who wrote my ruin." Clara laid the letters on the table one by one. Holcomb adjusted his glasses, reading in silence. The color drained from his face as he recognized the handwriting. These are Samuel Whitlock's," he muttered. I nodded. "He forged my name, claimed my pension, and signed away my husband's land. You were the magistrate who approved it, were you not?" His lips parted, but no words came. Around us, the townsfolk leaned forward, hungry for scandal, unsure whether to pity or fear me. I looked at them and felt no anger, only exhaustion. You all believed I helped a spy, I said. You called me traitor, witch, liar. But I was the one betrayed. I carried the shame that belonged to him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a man in the back, a descendant of one of the raiders, stood and said quietly, "We owe you an apology, Mrs. Whitlock." After the hearing, Clara and I returned home in silence. The town was hushed, uneasy. Some offered apologies, others avoided my eyes. It didn't matter. The truth had been spoken, and that was enough. That night, I sat again by the hearth, the letters resting on my lap. I took the small iron key from the tin box, the same key I had found in the ashes that morning so many years ago. Clara asked softly, "Why did you keep it, grandmother?" I turned the key over in my palm. "Because I knew it belonged to something important," I said. "Not just a lock, a moment. The day they searched my house, they dropped this key when they stole the chest with the letters. They thought they had sealed my fate, but the lock was never theirs to keep." Clara smiled faintly. "You kept the key to your own truth." I looked into the fire. The flames reflected in the metal, warm and gold. "Perhaps," I said. "Or perhaps the truth kept me." Spring came to Harper's Ferry that year, like a long-awaited forgiveness. The cherry trees bloomed over the riverbanks, and for the first time in decades, I walked through town without hearing whispers behind me. Children who once ran from me now waved. At church, they left space beside me again. Time does not erase cruelty, but it dulls its teeth when faced with truth. A historian from Washington came soon after, having heard of the letters. He asked if he could include them in a collection about the families caught in the crossfire of John Brown's raid. I agreed, on one condition, that my husband's name, and mine, be printed exactly as they were. Not erased, not corrected, not simplified. When the book was published, Clara read the passage aloud to me by the window. The sun poured across the page as she spoke the words I had waited a lifetime to hear. Martha Whitlock, falsely accused widow of Harper's Ferry, cleared of all charges posthumously through letters discovered in 1901. I smiled, feeling tears warm my cheeks. "Posthumously," I whispered. "They still think I'm dead." Clara laughed through her tears. "Then you've lived long enough to haunt them properly." That night, I took the iron key and hung it on a nail above the hearth. "Let it stay there," I told her, "so that when they ask what it opens, you'll tell them it opens the truth." And when I died, years later, Clara left the key where it hung. The house stood empty, but every traveler who passed said they could see a faint glow from the window, like firelight, even when no fire burned. Some said it was the spirit of the widow who waited 40 years for justice. Others said it was the reflection of truth itself, still shining, long after the lies had turned to dust. The year after the letters were revealed, Harper's Ferry felt different. Not brighter, not kinder, simply quieter. The town that once roared with accusation now spoke in whispers of apology. The same men who spat near my gate now tipped their hats as I passed. It was strange how silence could wound when you were hated, yet heal when it was born of respect. I spent my mornings on the porch, watching the Shenandoah roll beneath the bridge. The water looked the same as it had on the night of the raid, silver and restless, but it no longer frightened me. I had outlived the war, the shame, even my own brother's memory. Some nights, I dreamed of him standing in the garden, holding the key out to me, begging forgiveness. But I never took it from his hand in those dreams. Some debts belong to eternity. Clara kept the house bright. She filled it with laughter and light, opening curtains that had stayed closed for half my life. When she played the piano, I would sit beside the fire, the key glinting above the hearth, and imagine that every note loosened one more stone from the walls that had buried my story. One crisp autumn morning, a stranger arrived at my door. He wore a brown overcoat and carried a notebook under his arm. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, bowing slightly, "my name is Henry Allen. I'm collecting first-hand accounts for the National Historical Society. Your story, well, it's become something of a legend." I laughed softly. "A legend? I was once called a liar, a spy, and a witch. Legends are made of kinder words. He smiled, embarrassed. I suppose that's why I'm here, to set the record straight. If you'll allow me, I'd like to record your testimony. I hesitated. There was something unsettling about speaking my truth aloud after guarding it for so long. But Clara urged me on. "Grandmother," she said, "you've spent your life being spoken about. Now let them listen to you." So I told him everything, from the night of the raid to the letters in the attic, from the key I found in the ashes to the silence that followed me for 40 years. He wrote carefully, his pen scratching like the sound of rain. When we finished, he placed his hand over mine. "Your story," he said, "is the story of this country, how it wounds itself, and how it tries to heal." As he left, he paused at the gate. "May I ask, Mrs. Whitlock," he said, "why did you keep the key?" I looked at the little iron piece hanging above the hearth. "Because," I said, "even a rusted key can remind you that not every lock was meant to stay closed. Time is a strange companion. It walks beside you so quietly you forget it's there, and then one morning, you look back and realize it's led you to the edge of everything." My hands had grown thin and spotted. My voice, once sharp enough to cut through gossip, now trembled like old glass. But the river outside my window still moved with purpose, carrying away what it no longer needed. One afternoon, Clara and I took a walk to the footbridge. The air smelled of iron and rain. "Do you think people will remember you, grandmother?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "They'll remember what they need to. Some will call me the widow who went mad. Others will call me the woman who proved them wrong. Both are true." She slipped her arm through mine. "When I'm older," she said, "I'll tell your story, the whole of it, so no one forgets." We stood by the river until the sun dipped low, painting the water in gold and blood. I thought of my husband, of the men who never came home, of the nation they had died for, a country still learning how to be honest with itself. "Let them remember," I whispered. "But let them remember kindly." I did not live long after that autumn. My breath grew shallow, my hands cold, but I was not afraid. I had lived through enough death to know that dying is simply another way of telling the truth. There is no hiding in it. On the last night, Clara sat beside me, reading from the book where my name had finally been printed. She stumbled over the words, her voice breaking when she reached the end. When she finished, I smiled and reached for her hand. "Promise me something," I said. "When they ask you what that key means, you'll tell them it doesn't open a door." "Then what does it open?" she asked through tears. "Memory," I whispered. "It opens memory." After I passed, Clara kept her promise. She left the house untouched, the key still hanging above the hearth, the letters preserved in the same wooden chest. Over the years, visitors came, historians, travelers, even school children. They asked about the widow, about the raid, about the scandal, and Clara would lead them to the hearth and point to the key. That, she'd say, is not a key at all. It's a reminder that truth waits, even if it has to wait a lifetime. Decades later, the town changed beyond recognition. New bridges, new trains, new people who knew Harper's Ferry only as a dot on a map. But on the hill, the widow's house still stood, its windows clouded, its walls bowed with age. Travelers swore that when they passed at dusk, they saw a flicker of light through the window, a single flame glowing steady, though no one lived there anymore. In 1932, a young reporter wrote an article titled, "The Widow Who Waited 40 Years." He called the house a monument to endurance, a shrine to the quiet rebellion of truth. People came from across the valley to see the key. Some touched it, others prayed beneath it, as though the iron itself could bless them with courage. One evening, Clara, now gray-haired and gentle, locked the front door of the house for the last time. She turned back once, looking at the window where her grandmother's chair still faced the river. "You kept your word," she murmured. "They remember you now." Then she smiled, small and peaceful. "And the key still fits." The story of the widow of Harper's Ferry passed into legend. Not of battle or politics, but of one woman who held truth in her hands and refused to let it be buried. The iron key rusted, yes, but it never broke. And every time the wind moved through the empty house, the sound it made was soft and hollow, like a lock turning after many years. Because even in silence, truth has a voice. And some doors, no matter how long they've stayed closed, always open when the right hands return.